Tell us a little bit about Man in the Mirror so they can get connected to you.
Well, hello. Yeah, Man in the Mirror. It's a unique, wonderful ministry. My daughter asked me just yesterday. So what's the difference between Man in the Mirror and No Man Left Behind? Because she hears these phrases all the time. And says, well, Man in the Mirror is the ministry that overarches everything. It's a book written in the '80s, and so that book helps men with their own personal walk with Christ. But when it comes to the work I do it with churches, and we're installing a model for discipleship called No Man Left Behind. And it's a fantastic model that really has thought through all the corners of the issue of discipleship. And then I guess we do the word train. We train leaders to do discipleship. But better than that, it's a strategic plan that we can depend on. The question is, does Satan have a plan for the men in your church? Oh, yeah. But do you have a plan for men in your church? And so that's what we're trying to help you do, is develop your plan.
Excellent. Thank you, Wayne, for being in today.
You're welcome.
Hello to Tammy and Lori and Gary, Mike. Everybody's here. Love seeing you guys.
Woo-hoo!
Hope you had a great Mother's Day. Jannelle is still celebrating Mother's Day today. Mother's Day is that big of a deal in the world that she needs a whole weekend plus one.
Of course.
That's what moms get. Father's Day, by the way, will be oh yeah, it's Father's Day. Here's a card.
I support that. And a tie. Here's a card and a tie.
Yeah, and an old tie, perhaps.
Old.
Or one you already have.
Like a 10-cent tie from one you already have.
Dad, we wrapped up your tie and gave it to you. Happy Father's Day. Anyway, where's Mom?
You must like this one a lot because you wear it a lot.
We'll have to have you back to talk about the my pet peeve with that at some other point. We won't get lost in those weeds, but Father's Day, not such a big deal.
No.
Mother's Day is big as it should be. Mm-hmm. Huh? Not too big, as big as it should be. All right, so Kelly's waving. Hello, Kelly. So here's what we got for you. Some interesting information about maternity leave. Brand new study out. A YouGov poll of 21,000 people. It's conducted for over a couple of weeks last month into April 1st. Found that 82% of Americans think employees should be able to take paid maternity leave, including for adoption. And in this case, we're talking specifically maternity for the mom. And that level of support makes this benefit about as popular as chocolate. And that's, I mean, it's stating the obvious, but when you have 82% of anyone agreeing on anything in 2021,
It's popular.
it's very popular. So with that in mind, as scholars have studied paid leave for having a child, they've been struck by the persistence of American attitudes towards this. Even all the way back to 2012, the same number of respondents in another study, 82%, supported parents receiving paid leave. You also had repeatedly since then, polls have found at least 80% have supported paid leave. When you even look at political partisanship, you have the vast majority of Republicans, Democrats, and independents supporting paid family leave or maternity leave. 73% of Republicans, 83% of independents, and 94% of Democrats. Now, what's interesting is if you look at this about what exists currently, 9 states and Washington, D.C. have their own paid family leave programs, and federal workers get paid leave in 2020. But if you look at percentage of U.S. workers that can take a paid parent leave, we're not saying FMLA unpaid.
Is it can or did?
Can take paid parental leave.
Because I can. I just don't because we're not having babies anymore.
Right. And I can take, with Moody, a paid parental leave, but we're not having babies anymore. But with this in mind, so like what percentage of Americans can take a paid leave, as in their employer gives them a specific period of time off, and they're paid for that time off outside of their other paid time off. Mm-hmm. It's paid parental leave. Now, everybody has federal rights, as I understand it, to not lose your job if you take a family leave.
Now, I think
but it's unpaid.
In our world, I don't think it's like a matter of months. I think I have, it's kind of by hours, not by
perhaps
weeks.
But there are those protections in place that if you want to take a family leave unpaid, you can't lose your job.
Right.
It's illegal to
So
fire
the
someone.
Family Leave Act, correct.
But on top of that, you have to understand that's unpaid.
Right.
21% of U.S. workers can take paid parental leave. Only 21% are able to do this. even though over 80% of Americans think everybody should have access to this.
I've actually wondered if I can gift my time.
Some organizations do a pool of that for people in need. So here's the interesting thing. Under a new $1 trillion proposal, lots of those right now, the federal government, the executive branch is proposing a $1.8 trillion package of new and expanded benefits. One of the benefits in there would make it possible for all workers in America to take up to 12 weeks of paid family leave, totaling as much as $4,000 per month. So this proposal would make it so that 83% of Americans would get what they want, which is that everyone in America would have access to paid leave when they have a child or adopt a child. In this case, it's not just maternity, it's family leave. It's up to 12 weeks.
So I lost track of our conversation earlier. Are we talking about whether this is the right or wrong thing to do, or are we talking about whether this is biblical, or are we talking about how this should happen?
That's an
I lost
important
track of it.
distinction. That's an important distinction because we can't solve today how it should be paid for, what the logistics should be of what it is. Generally speaking, we're trying to figure out what should be the Christian disposition towards, the Christian opinion towards the idea of a guaranteed family leave when you have a child. Like, how does that fit in moral and ethical thinking that Christians already apply to government policy? Right? Like, we already think about biblical morals and ethics when it comes to refugee policy, immigrant policy, life policy, whether it's from assisted suicide to abortion. All those things have Christian implications, and we're loud about them.
Which is why we ended up so easily and quickly into the concept of, is life important? Sanctity of human life. Yes, life is important. How we go about, so the morality, how we go about demonstrating that life is important. And now we very quickly can get lost in all of the weeds by saying, well, then we are morally obligated to provide this. Now, how are we going to do it? It's not just as simple as saying we're going to move money around because I don't have access to the people that make those laws. Like, am I obligated? Now, if this happened inside of my home, you bet I'm going to make the decisions needed to make sure that that child is cared for inside of my home. Let's say that my daughter, for some reason, makes this error in her life and she has a baby out of wedlock. I would care for that child. Now, how do we say all of culture is going to be cared for? Now we have to make some broad sweeping decision about where that money is going to come from. And I just don't know how to do that.
A couple of quick things to jump in. First of all, we had Gary say, Jannelle's taking a day off to catch up on all the cooking and cleaning. And Mike got a kick out of that. Jennifer Jones reminding us, Dr. Jones, I should say, forgive me, doctor, that the Family Medical Leave Act only applies if your company's a certain size and if you've worked a set amount of hours in a year.
Well, thank you.
Good clarification. Aunt Twee, my Aunt Twee is here. Good. Hello, Aunt Twee. Good to see you, as usual. Somebody else said the Thinking Out Loud podcast indicating that, hey guys, I'm an HR director. A lot of companies do this poorly. We should promote family as much as possible. If your employee has a baby, they should get paid time off for that. Yeah, no, I understand the ethic of that, but and I think you were poorly represented by a couple of people that texted us earlier, Wayne, where what Wayne was saying is like, if we all had this biblical ideal of if someone in your own family needs help to be able to spend time with their child.
We help first in our first bubble.
We
help
should
first
do that
here.
And if we all did that,
To what percentage? Should the Lord help me? 100%. I would support the children in my home 100%. Because that's important.
So the question becomes, what do we as believers do/think about those in society that don't have that? There's plenty of people that either have dysfunctional families or no family at all in town, are dealing with whatever the struggle might be. Maybe a recently deceased spouse from an accident, maybe poverty, maybe an hourly wage job that's good, but they're still living paycheck to paycheck and don't have any sick time.
So we challenge ourselves with biblical thinking, right? And so is it the loving thing to do? Is it the loving thing to throw money at that person to simply pay for them to stay home? Or is it charity? So let's look at the King James word.
Interesting.
Charity is the gift with love, the gift with training, the gift with education, the gift with ownership, And so you come be part of us in our church where we can love you and provide. Provision is almost the afterthought to the loving, caring, training, and education.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, I guess that this would be looking at another expansion of the things at which we decide as a society are part of what you get for being in a society. For example, part of what you get is a K-12 education. Well, not everybody gets free K education.
Right.
But like we've said as a society,
That's important.
it's important,
Yep.
and you don't have to pay, if you don't want to, for your child's education, first grade through senior year in high school. It's already something we provide.
Right.
Taxpayer dollars pay for it, property taxes pay for it. We also have, I mean, even though we have debates about healthcare, no one's going to go to emergency room and get refused care if they're in crisis.
Correct.
So at some level, we have this idea that your physical well-being will be provided for.
Yep.
And so we have to decide as Christians, there's no passage of scripture that gives a particular position we should love or hate or be neutral about someone getting paid to be off when they have a child or adopt a child. I think Christians would say it's a good thing. That spending time with your child right after birth, caring for the health of the mother and the baby is super important.
But I'll be very quick to say, but it's also important that that child have both mom and dad in their life. And so, and what sacrifices are going on for that child from both mom and dad. So is it just presence that's important? No, those bear the burden of bear your burden in your youth. So there are some shockingly difficult moments to walk through as a young couple. Does he have to go to work? Well, maybe he does have to go to work to provide, but that's his calling. He would also, I hope, have the training from inside the church to say, but once you're clocked off, don't go out for a beer with your buddies. Get home, be home, give your wife a break, help.
Mike said, more for free. Wonder why today's generation wants to sit and get paid instead of working hard. 12 weeks seems like a lot. Families in the past have helped out with babies. How about work from home permission to help out? Infants don't need that much constant care, my opinion. I know where you're coming from on that, Mike. But I think what I like to grapple with is the aspect of this that moves beyond the philosophical and goes to the practical. It's let's set aside who's going to pay for it for now. It's like if I'm an ambassador of Christ and I'm having a conversation with somebody and they say, hey, you're a Christian. What do you think of the idea that everybody should be able to spend 12 weeks without, and get paid to be home with their child? Is that something a Christian would support? What do I do with that percentage of the population who doesn't have access to it, has no choice, and is forced to go right back to work really quickly?
So if we're just asking the question, is it good? Would it be good for mom and dad to be home with baby for the
Biblically speaking,
a trimester, 12? Yes.
it would be very good.
It would be
Okay.
good.
So now when we get to the fact that whether we like it or not, there still are people that don't get that. Only 21% of Americans have access to paid family leave. So there's a significant percentage that don't have access to it. Therefore, a lot of people who can't take what they need. Maybe they go back to work before their baby's fully ready for it for health reasons, or before they're fully ready for it for health reasons.
What I'm trying to do is not go head over and over the cliff and say that we ought to provide it. That's a step that I think is hard for me as a follower of Christ, because as soon as I say we ought to, we're now morally obligated to make sure that that's happening, and we're going to charge somebody for it. We're going to seek that money from a source, and now I'm going to look at a whole group of people that are already overtaxed and say, well, you're morally obligated. We already talked about we're morally obligated. We have to provide this, and now we're going to tax you for it. I don't agree.
So the question then becomes, what message does it send when the Christian position is, my taxes shouldn't have to pay for your leave?
Now let me teach you how to provide this within the context of your network.
But what is that? But how can you do that with the woman who had the baby today?
And now
And who lived in generational poverty, doesn't have those skills, and can't learn them in time.
So I was in this scenario. I was at the pregnancy center teaching
Right.
young couples how to do this thing we called it the fourth trimester. That shockingly important time period for their
Super,
baby
yeah.
to socialize, to feel comfortable, feel safe. We taught safety things, and we talked about what does it look like to partner Sometimes they were there by themselves, but sometimes they were there with their guys. And sometimes we look at them and says, who can you bring to these classes that's going to be investing in this child? When there were tears and saying there's nobody, well, then we partnered them with a mentor. We put somebody in their life because they really shouldn't do it by themselves. But most people do have a mom, a sister, a friend who is going to be part of that daily aspect of getting through that first 3 months.
You're giving the right ideal and the right should and the good way to do ministry. Is there anybody left that's not covered by those programs in society?
Well, yeah, people who aren't showing up to the classes to learn how to be a good mom. Those people are left out.
Is it
But now-
possible that they're working 2 jobs that don't have time?
It's possible.
Okay, so what do we say to the people who are working 2 jobs that they won't get any leave for? Like who, and so they can't get leave, they're not healthy. It's bad for their family's future for them to not stay home. It's bad for them economically to stay home. What do we do with them as believers?
Now, what percentage of the population are we talking about right now? They're working
I don't know.
2 jobs.
Let's just say it's 5%. Let's say it's 10%. What do we do like as believers? Do I tell them, man, you should have taken a class?
Now, we're talking about positioning our message. How do we position our message? For most people, you position your message at the point of need, at the point of desire. You have to put the message out there saying, I have an answer for you, but if you don't get your audience, you can't give your message. So I'm just going to put this back on you saying, well,
Sure.
if they're working too many jobs and they can't figure out how to put it all together and they're bearing down on their due date, so they're looking at that due date coming. I'm thinking there's more problems to deal with than just that they need time off. They have financial things to think through. They have relationship issues to think through.
Right.
They have family connections to think through. And I want to find that person, sit down and have a long conversation. But if they don't know they need it, I don't have access to them. I can't posture myself.
Sure. So what do we do with them? You're right. They probably have more problems than just not having access to paid family leave, but they still exist. And our philosophical discussion about what they should or should not do can't be changed today.
My message then goes out to, can I posture this next sentence to the bosses of those people and say, you ought to develop a system.
But they're not.
That,
Because only 21% get that.
I know.
So now what do we do with them? They still
but
exist.
it's still a posturing of a message.
Right, but
You
they
have to
still
posture
exist
this
is what I'm trying to get to. Like their existence doesn't change. As right as you are.
So you identify.
I'm going to have a population of people, a significant number that don't have access to paid family leave, who, for whatever reason, good or not, don't have access to the wonderful organization you worked for
Right.
that does provide some help. We've got people that, whether or not we agree with their decisions or like what they're doing, they are in a position where they can't take the time they need to be with their baby.
So
What do we do with them?
So here's the challenge I have. Okay, so we're going to create a government program. Yay! Now, but it's only going to be for people who are working. Do you see, like how do you posture this one? Now, you must be already working. Now it's going to be part of what? The Social Security program, where you had to work X number of hours, like the Family Leave Act, where, but my concern is that that's not how our government works. They just make money available to the tune of trillions of dollars.
Right.
And everybody applies for it because everybody gets a vacation after they have a baby. Now, my ministry heart breaks because now people are getting pregnant on purpose so they can take 12 weeks off.
And here's where I don't think the vast majority of people will get pregnant to take 12 weeks off. But what I can say is that I hear a lot of, like, let's say we're talking about poverty. Like a long time ago, before the Great Depression, really it was the church that cared for the poor. There was no social safety net for the poor other than the church. And so what will happen a lot is we'll talk about the people who are very poor and need help. Mm-hmm. And we get mad about a government program and say, well, the church should be doing that. And so the response to the idea of the existence of poverty today and people who need food, our response is, well, the church should be doing that. But there's still someone hungry today.
Correct.
The church is not doing it.
But should the government do it? That's the problem.
But when the church doesn't do it, who's going to do it? And so as a Christian, I have to say to myself, I want to be sure that my philosophy and the end result of it is fully encompassing of the gospel. So if the church isn't doing its job, should I let the person die in the gutter?
Now I need to,
But
but not lean on government to do it.
so then how does that get solved? The church isn't doing its job. We have people in poverty who need help. We always have. We always will. You don't want the government to do it. Who's going to do it?
So this is a brutal thing to say out loud, and nobody quote me because we're all friends here, right?
No, but this is why it's a good discussion. I like this.
So maybe we need to live in the discomfort of seeing a greater need, because if the government shouldn't do it, and the church should, perhaps we need to, as a culture, lean into the uncomfortable feeling that nobody's doing it, and people start asking the question, well, who should be taking care of this? And everybody says the church. Maybe the church then would wake up as a sleeping giant and say, okay, what does this look like? How do we do this? Because it's wrong to say the church isn't doing this, because I know churches that are.
There's tons of churches that do it.
Beautiful, little tiny congregations, usually, little tiny cute ones, that are engaging in the culture, engaging people's lives, bringing babies in, providing services, providing education. That's happening. It's just that the sleeping giant of the churchianity isn't waking up right now. The church at large isn't waking up to it.
Right.
And the alarm has to go off.
The hard thing for me in that, even as right as you are on many levels,
Is there discomfort? Yes.
well, I wouldn't call it discomfort. Who gets hurt? People in poverty.
Mm-hmm.
While those with affluence in the church watch
Jesus-
those in poverty
Jesus
suffer and
himself
die.
always said, the poor will always be with us.
Right.
So I hope we're not saying that we have to get rid of this category of poor.
No, I don't think it'll ever be gotten rid of.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that I don't want the church to be woken up at the expense of the poor.
But I think the government programs is actually expanding this category called poor when it really isn't supposed to expand.
It's a difficult concept because I think the social contract indicates philosophically we give up certain rights in order to be part of a society. And we all enjoy the benefits of taxpayer dollars in our parks and our city government and our reduced fees for kids'
we love it.
activities,
Yeah.
for our public education. We love it. But we don't want anyone else to get any more.
We don't want to give up our portion.
We don't want to give up our portion, even though on a daily basis we reap the benefits of it.
And that's been my
The
thought.
roads we drive on.
The pervading thought I've been having is we really shouldn't create a new tax. But should we reallocate taxes that just really don't do anything? There's this funky movie called Dave from years ago.
I remember that one.
He sits there and
sit-in president or whatever
and
the-
remushes all this. Like, why are we spending billions of dollars to make people feel better about the cars they already bought? Let's move that money over here where it's needed. And it's an interesting moment in the movie where you realize, wow, we spend a lot of money as a government on things that, quite frankly, aren't beneficial. So if we as a Christian community say we ought to be spending our money in a certain way, then how do we send that message up the chain?
I don't know. The more I read the Gospels, the more I see Jesus' generous and outrageous compassion for the least of these and generosity. And so no matter what, I want the flowing of my heart and my words to reflect, regardless of the consequence of what it might mean for me ideologically in America in 2021, I want out of the goodness of my heart and the Christ that's in me to flow generosity and compassion for the poor. Because that's what Jesus
did. A partnering
did.
message that says, but also work hard, be part of the community. Like there's a partnering message to the beautiful message Jesus had, is then also that early church message from Galatians and Colossians. It says, yeah, but get to work, work hard, and be a part of the community that's feeding you.
There's a passage in Thessalonians that talks about if you don't work, you don't eat, which is often misapplied, quite frankly. When you look at it, it's specific direction for the church in Thessalonica
Right.
that had people who were believers who were in the church and taking food without working.
Right.
It wasn't a Paul's admonition for Christian ethics about global poverty or even local poverty. It was an instruction for the church about people who were
It's like a food
not
pantry
working
in a church,
in the church.
and people that already had jobs showing up and grabbing food for their own houses.
Yeah, it wasn't a reflection of government or societal addressing of the poor. There's other stories you look at. The parable of the Good Samaritan was a story about the guy who wasn't the religious guy, who gave outrageously to somebody who was stuck in a gutter and beat up, didn't know why he was beat up, didn't ask him why,
Right.
paid for his care, and did an open tab for him to get better. You look at the story of the feeding of the thousands. Why did Jesus feed them? He didn't chastise them for not working hard or planning ahead. He had compassion on them, and so he created a miracle in order which they would eat.
Ruth and Boaz. It's an example of individual generosity, not systemic generosity. It never looks at the whole issue and says, here, the temple should feed the poor. It never said that. Individuals, we are the church. I am the temple of the Holy Spirit. So I am the one who has that generosity. But I still go, that's still a challenge to try and figure out how do I live that out in my network. I think that's what we should all be asking, and not say the church is failing, therefore it's not going to be done. Oh, I need to engage. I need to engage in my world.
And yet the government's left with looking at a population of people that the church hasn't cared for or reached, that Wayne hasn't cared for and reached, and they have to do something about it.
Yeah.
And we as a society have to decide what that actually means. Does it mean just the basics, bread and water? Does it mean government cheese? Does it now in 2021 mean when you have a baby, you get to spend time with them and get paid for it?
And I just feel like we're at a breaking point with our taxes. I don't think we can increase them anymore. Not in sustain, not have a sustained community.
What? Okay, so then what's the cost? Like we've reached a threshold, therefore.
Tax reform.
Okay, tax reform. And until then, what do we do with groups of people that are in desperate need? And the only way to help them is by increasing your taxes by a small amount that you'd hardly feel.
If we say there is a group in need, what is the need for them to have time off to take care of their baby so that that baby can be healthy?
And be a valid member of society, contributing, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And now I still lean in and say there are messages to go forth to employers, to friends, to aunts and uncles, to community, to church. I think the message goes out plural and says there is a group of people out there, let's engage. But it's a plural message. Again, it's still posturing. Who's listening here today?
Because there's still the people that Jesus would pay attention to that we would be debating about.
Absolutely.
That the least of these, the ones that were ignored. There was the guy who was the guy who was screaming for Jesus' name, and everyone told him to shut up, and then Jesus went and helped him. The Jesus I know is the one who radically and generously cares for the least of these, while the rest of us stand around and debate philosophy, which is what we're doing right now. Really robust, great discussion, and we didn't solve it by any means, but I think you got a chance to hear a couple of different angles on this important debate. And if we left you out,
because it was really hard to look at the phone while we did this today.
Yeah. There's been a lot of great comments. Thanks to everybody for being a part of this. But Wayne and I have work to do, so we have to go.
It's good to see you.
Again, Man in the Mirror, people can go connect with Wayne.
Yeah, you can hear Brian and Jannelle, or call me at 330-317-1251.